We are going to open the planning board meeting of June 26, 2025. I'll introduce planning board members and staff. To my far right, we have Steve Yost and Beverly Bookin and Doug Cook. I'm Jane Remsen, Vice Chair of the Planning Board and chairing tonight's meeting because Rick Noonan is not here tonight. We have Greg Catamatori, our planning director. We have David Rosen, a planning board member, and we have Eric Hinderly, our staff planner. The first item on the agenda tonight is an approval not required plan submitted by Daniel Fonzie to divide property at 35 Massasoit Road, Assessors Map 231, Lot 17, which has been requested to be continued to our meeting of August 6, 2025. So I will accept a motion. Who wants to be my motioner tonight?
So moved.
I guess Doug does.
Seconded.
So we have a motion by Doug Cook and a second by David Rosen to continue that. The second item on our agenda tonight. Oh yeah, and all in favor? Any opposed? A great point, Beverly. The second item on our agenda tonight is an approval not required plan submitted by Chris McCarthy to divide property at 86 Dennison Street, Assessors Map 115, Lot 16. And this had been continued from our previous meeting where we had some questions about the right of way and where the frontage was. And here is Chris McCarthy to update us.
Hello, Chris McCarthy, 166 Bray Street. Submitted some information to the planning department regarding the
Yeah, get closer to the mic if you don't mind.
status of the right of way that's out in front, and I think that was taken from the planning department in front of Sue Egan, and I think that Greg probably has something to say about that.
Yep, so we received additional plan references, plans, as well as a title review. And at this point, both myself and the solicitor are satisfied that it meets the frontage. Somebody's not muted.
It was, sorry.
Meets the frontage and access requirements for the A&R endorsement.
Okay, great. Do we need to pull the A&R up just to look at it again while we vote on it?
I have it up here right now.
Sorry. Yeah. So just to remind everybody, if you can make that bigger. The area of concern was where it says ROW, and we weren't sure if that was actually an ROW or if that was owned by somebody, but it's been determined by City Council, I believe. She gave an opinion that that is indeed the public right of way. So there is the required frontage for these A&R lots. So I will accept a motion to approve the A&R plan at 86 Dennison Street.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
It's a motion by Doug Cook and a second by David Rosen. All in favor? Oh, it was Steve? Oh, it's a second by Steve Yost. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay,
Thank you.
motion carries. Thank you, Chris. Next on our agenda is an approval not required plan submitted by the Campbell Family Trust of 2003 to redivide property at 71 Norwood Heights and 96 Leonard Street, Assessors Map 182, lots 2 and 4. Can you introduce yourself with your name and address for the record, please?
Of course, Madam Chair. I'm Dan Ottenheimer, civil engineer with Mill River Consulting at 6 Sargent Street here in Gloucester. I'm here about a simple land swap between two parties. And we can bring the plan up, I can walk you through it. But essentially, this is a friendly adjustment of about 2,000 square feet between two neighbors. Thank you, Eric. So there's a small parcel on the bottom along Leonard Street that is currently used for access into the garage that's immediately to the right of that. And that garage and the house adjacent to it are owned by the Harrises, but to get there, you have to drive over the land of the Campbells. And on the flip side, the Campbells live in the house that's further up on the screen, and they currently park in the area that's owned by the Harrises, right where Eric's cursor is. So it just makes sense to switch the two small pieces of land so that both parties are correctly using the land that they own. So that's what we have before you this evening.
And the frontage for the Campbell's lot is maintained by that piece on the left, which is off screen at the moment.
The Campbell lot actually has 3 pieces of frontage. Has frontage on Walnut, on Leonard, and on Norwood Heights, which is also called South Circle.
And I see that that land is where you're talking about doing this swap is encumbered by a conservation restriction. Does this have to be, who holds the restriction, and do they also have to authorize this?
Yes, so it is held by Essex County Greenbelt, and there's no change in the use. It's just a change in the ownership. So we don't expect, all of these parties have a very close working relationship with Greenbelt because there's been some other activities there that involve changes of use, but this is just moving land. So I don't think we need to involve the Greenbelt on this.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, David.
Oh, no. Does anyone else have any questions? No? Okay. I will accept a motion to approve the A&R plan submitted by the Campbell Family Trust of 2003 for the land swap at 71 Norwood Heights and 96 Leonard Street.
So moved.
Seconded.
Okay, that is definitely a motion by Doug Cook and a second by David Rosen. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
No? Okay.
Aye.
The motion carries unanimously.
Wonderful. Thank you for your time this evening.
Thank you. Next thing on our agenda is a common driveway special permit application. The common driveway special permit is submitted by Anthony Giacalone. I got it. Giacalone. And Michael Fazio, care of Seaside Legal Solutions at 9 and 11 Andrews Court, Assessors Map 237, lots 49 and 126. And we have received a request to continue that application until our next scheduled meeting of July 17, 2025.
So moved.
A second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Doug Cook and a second by Steve Yost. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Okay, under public hearings. In accordance with the provision of Mass General Law, Chapter 41, and the rules and regulations governing subdivision of land in Gloucester, the Gloucester Planning Board will consider a 2-lot definitive subdivision plan filed by 20 Main LLC entitled Chisholm Court Extension at 20 Main Street, Assessors Map 7, Lot 94. And I believe we have representation on Zoom.
Thank you. Good evening. This is Sean McCormick. I'm counsel to the applicant, 20 Main Street. As a attendee is Hayes Engineering. If they could be promoted to panelist, I think that's going to be the bulk of the presentation. Just by way of background, so this was a subdivision plan submitted. We have been proceeding on a parallel track with an entirely different an independent project, which is a mixed-use building that has obtained all the permitting it needs, but it's sort of held up in litigation right now with an abutter appeal. So I'm just sort of prefacing this to remind everyone, the subdivision plan we're here on tonight is not the mixed-use project. It's a different project. And I think with that introduction, I want to give it over to Mr. Ogren from Hayes Engineering to walk through some of the issues that were presented by the town's peer review consultant.
I thought, before you jump in, does it make sense to have the peer reviewer, because they submitted their review, they never presented that to the board, and it might make sense to, basically they could summarize and kind of get to the point of outstanding issues, as there's been a
Yes.
response to that.
Of
Yes.
course, I jumped the gun on that one.
That's okay.
My apologies.
So James Pearson is here from Weston and Sampson.
I thought I was just behind. And I was embarrassed and didn't want to say so. So yes, I would love to hear from James Pearson first.
Yes, hi, good evening. Yeah, thanks for having me. I'll just give you a really quick high-level synopsis of what the comments were, rather than trying to go through everything verbatim, just to make things quicker. So there were multiple comments in the letter that related to storm drainage pipe sizing calculations. Some of these comments kind of had some overlap. We didn't see that with the latest submission that the applicant had provided any of those calculations, and so from our perspective, those comments hadn't really been addressed. There was also a requirement for a nitrogen and phosphorus loading and absorption analysis. We didn't see any kind of calculation related to that. So from our perspective, that one also looked like it had not been addressed at this point. The applicant did provide test pit logs as we had requested. The nearest test pit was about 60 feet north of the proposed underground infiltration system. Based on the data from that log, it looked like they most likely do have the required groundwater separation. So we were just suggesting that perhaps the board should consider adopting a condition of approval that would require them to excavate a confirmatory test pit at the time of construction prior to installing the system. We think that would be a reasonable approach. We did notice the test pit logs too indicated that there's loamy sand present on the site, and we did notice in their calculations they had been using a lower infiltration rate than is allowable for loamy sand, which we don't object to if the applicant wants to be more conservative. We were just pointing it out just to note that they could be using a larger rate if they wanted to. And then a final issue is that in their originally submitted stormwater calculations, they had indicated that they had counted the entire volume of their underground chamber system as available water quality volume, whereas because the chamber system has outlet pipes, you can't really count that entire volume. That was one of our original comments, and from this latest submission, it looks like that still really hadn't been addressed. So we pointed that out in our comment letter as well. And so really aside from that, it looks like a lot of other things had largely been addressed.
You have any comment on that, Greg?
No, again, I think there's just been a few outstanding issues that were provided to the applicant, and I'm not sure how they're going to respond to that as well. Some of them are subdivision submission requirements. So in the alternate, they would have to request a waiver from the subdivision standards, and there would have to be some form of justification to grant such a waiver.
Okay. Hold on, I'm not in my Zoom screen because I'm looking at the peer review report. So Sean, if you're ready to proceed, go ahead. Or rather, I guess from Hayes Engineering.
Yeah, okay,
Sure.
that's me, I think. Peter Oden, Hayes Engineering. I agree with the comments that were made by Weston and Sampson's representative, and I think that we had an opportunity to review the drainage system here with the other submission. And it was found that the pipes, they're existing pipes, they're like 8-inch pipes and they're not up to the standard. We requested a waiver at that time. We request a waiver now because the constraints are such that it doesn't really matter whether the pipes have the required capacity for your subdivision regs. There's not much opportunity to change the pipe size due to cover and the fact that it goes into an existing drainage system. The other thing is, I made the point that we're reducing the amount of imperviousness, so it shouldn't really be of concern, I don't think. The other points that were mentioned as far as the storage capacity and the use of the low value of infiltration. I believe this might have been done before we dug the test holes, and we didn't want to estimate the infiltration rate, but it is conservative, so it shouldn't really matter, I don't think. As far as the recharge volume, I didn't have a chance to look at that. I've just got out of the hospital with back surgery, unfortunately, and I didn't have a chance to really look into that. But that can be adjusted. So I guess my bottom line is I would ask that the board consider a waiver for the drainage like we did the last time. And likewise with the calculations of the nitrogen and phosphorus loading, I think we had some discussions with Greg about the fact that in a downtown setting like this, it doesn't make much sense. And we did some calculation the last time, but we agreed that it really wasn't too applicable in a downtown setting, particularly where we're reducing the amount of imperviousness. And this does not discharge to a stream as described in the regulations. It actually discharges to an outfall in Gloucester Harbor. That would be my response, and I think the board can maybe make a decision based on whether they want to grant the waiver. If they want more justification of the waiver, I can write something, but I think that it's justified in this thing where this has been the drainage that drained the Chisholm Court historically for a number of years, and we're reducing the amount of imperviousness. So that would be my presentation on it.
Thank you. I think if Chisholm Court is applying for waivers or is asking the planning board for waivers, we should probably see a request for those in writing before we decide on anything. And otherwise, I rely on our experts regarding stormwater test pits that don't matter, and nitrogen and phosphorus. So I will turn it over to Greg.
I don't know, maybe if, James, if you could just kind of highlight, or if you have a particular recommendation one way or another on some of those requests. I think ultimately, we should have kind of enumerated all the waiver requests at this point. It's been some times, it's been a very kind of choppy review of this project. And typically we'd also have those included on the final definitive plan set to identify what's been approved as a waiver moving forward.
Yeah, well, certainly happy to weigh in. With respect to the waiver request, it sounds like what's on the table really, for the most part, are just two things related. One of them is related to the stormwater calculations and pipe sizing, and the other one really is more focused on the nitrogen and phosphorus loading calculations. So the nitrogen and phosphorus issue, you know, I have had some correspondence between myself and some of the city staff about that, just trying to understand if the city has that standard in order to try to maintain some accounting of nutrient removal for purposes of documenting compliance with MS4 permit requirements. And from what I can tell, it doesn't sound like they use that data for that purpose. So aside from the fact that this is just simply one of Gloucester's regulations, I don't know what else it does really to benefit the city. So In the absence of any knowledge as to how that's of any benefit to the city, I would defer to city staff to uh, to sort of give their opinion on that as to whether they think a waiver would be appropriate. From my perspective, where I sit, I wouldn't have an objection to a waiver with regard to the nitrogen and phosphorus calculations. With respect to the pipe sizing issue, certainly the pipes that are there have been in place for some time. They've historically drained Chisholm Court. I don't have any knowledge as to whether they're appropriately sized or not. They could be undersized for all I know, particularly with respect to the standard that the regulations stipulate. With regard to the claim that there's insufficient cover to go to 12-inch pipe, it looked to me like from the plan that the pipe out in the street is a 12-inch pipe. So it would seem to me that it might be possible to upsize the pipes within the site to 12-inch, knowing that there is a 12-inch pipe downstream that they're connecting to. So I guess at this point in time, with the information in front of me and from what I know right now, I don't have sufficient information to justify why we would give a waiver for the smaller pipe size. Other than I think there is a statement in the regulations that says that some of these standards have to do with pipes being located in the right of way, and Chisholm Court is a private way. I don't know if the statement about right of way applies to private rights of way like this. So I do think that, if Hayes is going to request a waiver for this, they need to provide a little bit more justification. If the claim is that they just physically can't fit 12-inch pipes because there's maybe like insufficient cover or something like that, then they need to prove that, pipe materials these days, most modern pipe materials, you can have as little as a foot of cover and it can still be a stable installation. So I think that would be a tough one for Hayes to prove. If it's going to be on the basis of we've done calculations and we've proven that 8-inch is perfectly adequate for the amount of flow anticipated, to me that might be a more compelling basis for a waiver. So I might suggest that maybe Hayes could produce that perhaps if they want to support a waiver. I'm just throwing out ideas here, and I'm just saying that what I have right now doesn't
Thank you.
support the waiver.
I think I would respond to that by saying that I would concede that the pipes are not of adequate size based on your planning board standards. And for us to put a 12-inch pipe into an existing 12-inch in the street doesn't make sense, because there's a catch basin right at the entrance there that can catch any water that we can't catch anyway, and we are reducing the amount of imperviousness. So I still contend that it doesn't make any reasonable sense to do a bunch of calculations or to change the pipes. If the board wants to see the pipes changed to the minimum of 12-inch, we'll see if we can get the cover or enough cover. I agree that the pipes today don't need 3 feet, but I believe your rules and regulations require, and we already had to get a waiver for that on the 20 Main Street multifamily plan. So I thought that this kind of fit into that same category, so to speak, but it's up to the board to decide.
May I,
Yes, go ahead.
is there a third option on pipes, which would be an approval that contains a condition that, prior to construction or prior to occupancy or something, that pipes get upgraded?
I mean, we could consider that. James, do you have any reaction to that?
Well, I mean, the question will remain, what do they get upgraded to? And so, I mean, you could defer the thing down the road with a condition to say that, the prior to construction, the applicant would furnish, some documentation as to, to justify the pipe sizing they want to upgrade to, and then show that pipe sizing on their construction plan. It could certainly be handled that way, and then it could be reviewed perhaps on an administrative level.
If you're willing to make that a condition, why wouldn't you just agree to that now? Sean?
I can't think of a good answer to that question, Madam Chair. I mean, I think unless Peter is going to tell me that I'm speaking out of turn, I don't know why we wouldn't. I guess the reason we wouldn't agree to it is if it turns out it's not possible because of coverage issues.
I mean, we certainly could agree to a condition that will increase the pipe sizes to 12-inch if it's physically possible.
Who determines whether it's physically possible?
It
Right.
would be based on the flow line and the amount of cover.
Well,
So
and
are you talking about in the built condition, don't we have proposed grades?
Yeah, we do, but we're not changing the grades, so.
that's where it could be submitted to administrative review by the Department of Public Works or somebody along those lines. And then if they want to bring in a third party, like somebody such as myself or whomever, to look at it at that time, that could always be done at that time as an administrative process. I think that's kind of what we're saying here.
Has the city engineer looked at this? Have they reviewed?
Well,
what these?
we've been pretty much using Weston and Sampson to kind of take on this review.
I
I think
see, yeah,
it's something maybe we can revisit. I know there isn't usually a good history of putting things in conditions like this that, again, 2 years from now or whenever it might be constructed, putting that burden on Public Works to then kind of review and make a decision. I think maybe in the short term, if we can kind of clearly articulate what's outstanding in a waiver request, either provide additional justification, or if we can come up with a condition that we're comfortable with, that I'd like at this point Public Works to review as well, to make sure that it's something that they feel is enforceable and that will produce the outcome that we're all looking for. So I think, in the absence of, and I appreciate, Peter being here this evening and responding to the review that was only provided yesterday, again, because of the submission to the board as well. I think it makes sense to try to put these things on paper so that everybody can see them, and we can get to the point of having the board take a disposition on the application, and then have clearly articulated waivers and conditions.
Okay, does that sound agreeable? Sean?
Yes, Madam Chair. Yes.
Okay, great. So that's the plan, and we could continue this to our next meeting in July, which is July 17th, or we could continue it to August 6th. I just want to make sure that whatever date you choose, that you're totally prepared. So I'd be happy to continue to August 6th. What do you think?
Peter, I anticipate this is a question for you more than me.
I'd be happy to continue it to August 6th. That'll give us plenty of time to see if we can get the 12-inch pipes in. If we can squeeze them in there somehow, we can change the plan and move on.
Okay.
And on a
great.
parallel track, we'll provide a written articulation of the waivers requested and the.
Yeah, and I think you had mentioned a condition about the test pits, right? Was that a suggested condition?
I believe that was a suggested condition that's articulated in the review memo from Weston and Sampson.
Okay, so,
But we will put those all in one place.
right, that's what I would like.
Yep.
Great. Okay, so I will accept,
One other thing.
oh, one other thing. Great.
And just verbally, I believe, as this has been quite protracted. The last continuance request also included today's date as the date for the board to act, extending the time for their action. So if you would also verbally extend that now to August, what did we say was the next meeting? August 6th. Does that make sense to you, Sean?
Do you want to build in a few days after?
That would, yeah. Why don't we continue it out maybe to the second meeting of the planning board in August to act, which would be 14 days later, which would be the 20th, August 20th.
That would be agreeable and is so agreed.
Thank you.
Do we need to vote on that date extension or just
The
verbal
now
agreement is?
you don't have to.
Okay.
He's agreed to that extension of time, and then we just have to continue to the August 6th.
Okay, great. So then I will accept a motion to continue the public hearing for the 2-lot definitive subdivision at 20 Main Street to August 6th, 2025.
So moved.
Seconded.
So that is a motion by Doug Cook and a second by David Rosen. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
Thanks, Sean.
All right. Thanks everyone for the time this evening. Thanks, Mr. Pearson.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for your time.
Have a good evening.
Good evening.
Okay, we have another public hearing. In accordance with the provisions of Mass General Law, Chapter 40A, Section 5, and the Gloucester Zoning Ordinance, Section 1.11, the Gloucester Planning Board to consider the following proposed zoning amendment. Amend the Gloucester Zoning Ordinance, Section 1.4, Organization and Administration of the Zoning Board of Appeals, Section 1.4.1, Membership. And we can bring up a proposed language change, which I will also read. Okay, this language proposes that we remove the, from the GZO, the membership requirement for the ZBA that every member and associate member shall have been a resident of the city of Gloucester for at least 3 years prior to his or her appointment to the board. Is there anyone here to talk about this?
I don't think so, other than this was forwarded as to the planning board as a council order by Councilor Nolan. That was then initiated by the full council. My understanding is there's been a little bit of a challenge to keep up the membership on the zoning board in particular. Not all boards, committees, and commissions have residency requirements. This is one
I think none do.
that is in the code of ordinances. And I think they do have some candidates that have less than that tenure. And at this point, they're recommending or by the proposal of this zoning amendment to remove that requirement so that they can get a full quorum back on the zoning board.
Right. I actually did talk to the ZBA chair about this, and it's exactly what Greg said. They do have trouble getting people on board, especially if they have to wait 3 years for them to live in Gloucester. But on the other hand, the Zoning Board of Appeals is a really membership of the Zoning Board of Appeals is really detailed. It really requires a deep knowledge of the city. It's making decisions requires understanding, a deep understanding of the neighborhoods and the issues and so on and so forth. So I'm kind of mixed on this. It is true. I don't think any other of the main boards and committees, the Concom, the Board of Health, the Planning Board, the appointed boards and committees have a residency requirement. Is that a correct statement?
I'm not aware that they do.
Yeah.
It's not the planning board, doesn't have the 3?
No. Crazy.
I was under the impression it did, but
Nope. So are we being asked for a recommendation here?
You are. You're
Yeah.
also in a public hearing setting, so if there's anybody that wants to speak,
Oh,
we can
right.
open it to the public.
Yes. Well, I don't see anyone in the audience in person, but let me check the attendees. So we are in a public hearing. I see 3 attendees online. If any of you would like to speak for or against this measure, please raise your hand. And I see Beverly Palmachi. Can you admit her? Beverly, you should be able to speak now.
Okay, Beverly Palmachi, 8 Commonwealth Avenue. The 3-year residency requirement sounds like a good idea to me. So, I guess I'm not for reducing that. I agree, there's a lot to know about the city before making pretty serious, decisions, so I'd go with the, leaving it as is. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else who is attending on Zoom want to make a statement for or against this zoning ordinance change? Raise your hand. Board members, do you have comments? I had one thought was changing, which was changing it to 1 year instead of 3 years, but I'm interested in all of your opinions.
I was wondering what kind of outreach is made for these kind of things? Is there, do they announce it on the website, or how do people know that there might be openings?
Yeah, I think through the mayor's office, because they're all generally kind of put forward as potential appointees and then confirmed by the city council. So periodically there are outreach to the newspaper, there's outreach through the Facebook page, through the website, vacancies are apparent. Typically, most often board members come through kind of organically through the board itself doing outreach with folks that might be interested. So it's just a challenge. There's a lot of volunteer boards. There's a lot of volunteers, but they all have minimum requirements to conduct a meeting. So, and you know, some of those that are more intensive, it's a big time commitment. So I think, you know, that's difficult for folks to fit into their lives. But in this most recent, again, this was proposed as a way to potentially, there are some candidates that fall less than that residency requirement. And that was, I think, the impetus for this proposal. But I can understand your comments as well in terms of not only understanding the roles of different volunteer boards, that unless you're involved already, you know, there's a lot of responsibility and understanding of what your role is, but then also applying it to the different neighborhoods in the community is a big learning curve.
In your expertise is almost the more important, you know, what your knowledge is on issues that come before the zoning board.
There are term limits for being on the ZBA.
Yes, I believe they have, well, I can look it up. I think it might be 3 years.
And does, when it says resident here, are we assuming full-time residency or part-time? Because there could definitely be part-time residents.
It's full-time.
It's full-time.
It is.
So we might want to clarify.
Well,
that.
it's wherever you vote or, you know, where you declare your residency.
Okay, all right. I would say at least a minimum of 1 year, and, you know, if we needed a compromise, I would say 2.
My comment is that if it's a really pragmatic measure at this point, because there are specific candidates that haven't met the 3-year requirement, it would be good to know how long they've been there and maybe reduce it to whatever minimum without favoring one candidate over the other by the cutoff.
1.5.
1.5 is the minimum. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So, and the other comment I had is that regardless of how long you've been here, not regardless, but even in the face of that, some people get to thoroughly know a lot of the city in a short time, while others who have been here much longer live kind of sheltered lives in their own little space. So
That is very true. Beverly?
I find it interesting that it doesn't apply to the planning board, because you could make the same argument for the planning board that you do for the ZBA, that it's based on community values and knowledge of, you know, development patterns and all that kind of thing. So it seems on the face of it to be unfair that it has a restriction on one board and not
Well,
on the other.
I should clear, the planning board, you do have to be a resident of the city, but there's no like 3-year limit. just
I
you
will
have to be a
say, I
resident.
think what comes to the ZBA is much more granular than what comes to the planning board. It's much more boots on the ground, you know, very specific.
I guess the only other thing you could think about is this is somebody that would have to present themselves to the mayor. The mayor would get
Vet them.
behind in terms of thinking that they'd be a good fit for the board, and then confirmation by the city council. So, I mean, you could have, for instance, someone that maybe lived in Gloucester, moved away, moved back and said, now I'm ready to really roll up my sleeves. And they say, okay,
That's
well,
true.
let's wait 3 years. I mean, again, there's all the
Yep.
scenarios you could run.
Right.
But it's an odd one for, it's not really affecting
Yeah.
land use like the board is usually
Yep.
requested to
Yep.
make a recommendation on, but nonetheless, it's.
Yeah, it's before us because it's in the GZO.
Yep.
Well, I guess I would recommend changing 3 years to 1 year. But I don't know how the board feels about that. Yeah? Okay. Last chance for anyone online to raise your hand. Hang on one second. Oh, did I just raise my hand? Sorry about that. And I don't see anyone online who is raising their hand, so I will accept a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Second.
That was a motion by Doug Cook and a second by Beverly Bookin. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, public hearing is closed.
So we have a recommendation. Do we need to vote on the recommendation?
Yes, I do believe we do. Right, Greg?
So, and because the language of the proposed amendment is to delete that section.
So we can make a motion to delete the section and then,
Well, your recommendation would be to recommend not deleting that section, but modifying it to change the residency requirement from 3 years to 1 year.
yes. If anyone wants to move what Greg said.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Steve Yost and a second by David Rosen to,
Recommend to the city council.
Right, to
amending
recommend-
Section 1.4.
what?
To recommend to the city council amend section 1.4 as
Right,
framed.
to recommend to the city council to amend section 1.4 by deleting the word 3 for 3 years and inserting the word 1 for 1 year. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed?
Point of order, I'm just curious. So
Yeah.
this is just a recommendation for starters, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
And second, do we need to have any background information, why we voted, why we made this recommendation?
I think we had a brief discussion and that outlined why we,
Right, but is that forwarded then to the city council? Say,
That'll be
Andrew-
forwarded to the city council.
Okay, that's
Yep.
what I wanted
Yep.
to confirm, because I think it's important for them to understand why we thought that was the case.
okay. We do have minutes for June 5th, which, thank you, Catherine, if you're there. They were so good again. Does anyone have any comments on the minutes of June 5th? I did not have any comments. No? Okay. I will accept a motion to approve the minutes of June 5th, 2025.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, that was a motion by Doug Cook and a second by Beverly Bookin. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, minutes are done. Does anyone have any matters not reasonably anticipated prior to the noticing of this meeting that they would like to bring up? No? Okay, seeing none, I will accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Who said second? Steve? Okay, a motion by Doug Cook and a second by Steve Yost. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, thank you.